When people say family is supposed to be your safe place, I almost laugh. Because for me, family was where betrayal was born. My father had always been a complicated man. Strict, demanding, but secretly biased. He never said it out loud, but everyone could feel it. My sister Claire was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And me? I was just the shadow in the background, the one constantly reminded that I would never shine as bright. Still, I tried. I studied hard, worked extra hours, and followed every rule he set. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would see me. But when my father passed away unexpectedly, the truth was revealed in the most brutal way. In his will, he left almost everything. His house, his company shares, his savings, to Claire. To me, he left only an old car and a few personal items. That was it. I couldn't believe it. My whole body went numb as the lawyer read the words. I looked at Claire, expecting at least some guilt, some hesitation. But instead, she smiled. A small, victorious smile. My own sister had just inherited everything, and she wasn't even pretending to feel sorry for me. Dad always knew I would take care of things, Claire said later, her tone dripping with arrogance. Well, you'll be fine. You don't really need much, do you? Her words cut deeper than a knife. I didn't just lose my father. I lost the little respect I thought I had in his eyes. And worse, Claire treated me like I was disposable. At first, I tried to convince myself that maybe she deserved it. Maybe she really was the responsible one, the capable one. But soon, I started seeing another side of her. Claire wasn't planning to take care of anything. She was spending recklessly, hosting lavish parties in our father's house, bragging to her friends about the inheritance, and flaunting her new power. The company shares that were meant to secure our family's future were just her ticket to luxury. Every time I saw her wasting what was once my father's hard work, my anger grew. I stayed quiet on the outside, but inside, something was boiling. I told myself I wouldn't let it break me. I wouldn't be the victim. If Claire wanted everything, fine. But she would learn soon enough what it felt like to have it all stripped away. The turning point came one evening when I went to the house to pick up the last of my belongings. Claire was hosting yet another extravagant gathering. Music blasted from the speakers, glasses clinked, and laughter echoed through the halls that once held my childhood memories. When I stepped inside, Claire barely acknowledged me. "Oh, you're here," she said with a smirk, her champagne glass in hand. "Try not to embarrass yourself. Some of my friends don't even know I have a brother." That was it. That was the moment my grief turned into resolve. If she wanted to erase me from the picture, I would make sure she regretted it. I would take apart the world she thought was untouchable, piece by piece. But revenge is not something you rush. It requires patience, precision, and strategy. I walked out of that house with my box of things, but in my heart, I carried something much heavier. A plan. For the next few weeks, I observed. I watched how Claire managed the company shares, who she trusted, and where she spent her time. I saw her weaknesses, her greed, her arrogance, her careless need to show off. She thought she was invincible. She thought no one could touch her. But what she didn't know was that I was no longer her forgotten brother. I was her shadow, watching every move, waiting for the perfect moment. And when that moment came, I would not just take back what was mine. I would take away everything she loved. The first step was to get closer to the people she relied on most. Because if I wanted to dismantle her life, I had to start with the foundation. And as I stared at her group of smug, shallow friends laughing in that grand living room, I already knew exactly where to begin. And so, my revenge began in silence. Getting close to Claire's circle wasn't difficult. Her friends were shallow, attracted to money and status more than loyalty. I started by showing up at her events, pretending to play along. Claire thought it was pathetic, like I was clinging to her crumbs. But really, I was studying everyone around her. There was Jason, her business advisor. He was sharp on paper but lazy in reality, always cutting corners and secretly pocketing money from company projects. Then there was Mia, her so-called best friend, who had a habit of gossiping behind Claire's back. And finally, there was Ryan, Claire's boyfriend. Outwardly charming, but I noticed the way his eyes wandered to every other woman in the room when Claire wasn't watching. These people weren't pillars in her life. They were cracks waiting to split wide open. All I had to do was apply pressure. I started with Jason. One afternoon, I approached him under the pretense of asking about investment opportunities. At first, he dismissed me, until I casually mentioned the irregularities I had noticed in some financial reports. His face paled instantly. I hadn't even shown him proof, but the fear in his eyes told me I was right. He was stealing, and he knew I could expose him. "Relax," I said smoothly. "I'm not interested in ruining you. Not yet. But I think you could be useful to me." He swallowed hard, realizing he had no choice but to cooperate. With Jason in my pocket, I now had access to confidential documents and insight into Claire's financial dealings. She trusted him blindly, never suspecting he was already compromised. Next was Mia. Winning her over was laughably easy. I pretended to be vulnerable, sharing how unfair the inheritance had felt, how much it hurt to be left out. Mia thrived on drama, and soon she was spilling Claire's secrets just to have someone to whisper to. She told me about Claire's reckless spending, her fights with Ryan, even her insecurities. Every detail was ammunition. But Ryan was different. He wasn't just a pawn. He was the key. Claire worshipped him, flaunted him like her greatest prize. Yet I could see through him. He liked the lifestyle she provided, but he didn't love her. I decided to test him. One night after a party, when Claire had gone upstairs, I found Ryan lingering near the bar. I struck up a casual conversation, joking about how Claire spoiled him. To my surprise, he didn't deny it. Instead, he laughed, saying, "Well, if she wants to pay for my drinks, who am I to complain?" That laugh told me everything. He was with her for the money, not the person. And people like him could be bought or broken if you dangled the right temptation. Piece by piece, I was weaving myself into her world without her noticing. She still looked at me with that smug superiority, convinced I was powerless. But behind her back, her allies were slowly shifting toward me. The real test came when I invited Jason and Mia out for dinner without Claire. I wanted to see how loyal they really were. By the end of the night, Jason was practically begging me not to expose him, and Mia was ranting about how selfish Claire could be. It was clear they were mine now. But revenge is never just about allies. It's about timing. I didn't want to strike too early and risk her rebuilding. No, I needed her to feel safe, untouchable, while I set the stage for her downfall. One evening, I visited the family company headquarters, pretending it was just to collect some old files. I walked through the building that should have been partly mine, watching employees rush around, whispering "Miss Claire" with forced respect. I felt the bitterness tighten in my chest. She was playing boss, but she had no idea what real leadership looked like. And soon, they would all see it. As I left, I saw Claire arriving with Ryan at her side, laughing like she owned the world. She didn't even notice me standing near the exit. And in that moment, I realized something important. She had underestimated me completely. That was her greatest weakness. The next phase of my plan was simple. Show her world how fragile it truly was. I began feeding small bits of information to the right people. Anonymous tips about Jason's sloppy accounting, little hints to Mia about Ryan's wandering eyes, seeds of doubt planted carefully. And it worked. Within weeks, cracks began to show. Claire's meetings became more tense as investors started questioning her decisions. Rumors of Ryan flirting with other women started circulating, thanks to a few carefully timed photos I arranged. Mia whispered louder than ever, enjoying the chaos I encouraged. Claire was still standing, but the ground beneath her was shaking. And I was just getting started. The night I saw her yelling at Ryan in the driveway, her face red with fury, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the smirk on her lips when she said Dad had always trusted her more. And the pity vanished. She thought she had everything. She thought I had nothing. But the truth was, I was already holding the strings. And soon, I would pull them hard enough to watch her perfect little world collapse. And the best part? She wouldn't even see it coming. The weeks that followed were deliciously chaotic. Claire had no idea where the whispers were coming from, no idea that the walls around her were closing in because of me. She still wore her designer heels and diamond necklaces, strutting into rooms like she owned them. But the cracks in her facade were spreading faster than she could patch them. I watched from the sidelines as the first domino fell. Jason. The investors began noticing inconsistencies in the quarterly reports. One particularly sharp man on the board called Claire out during a meeting, pointing out missing funds. Claire looked at Jason in shock, and he stumbled through excuses. He promised it was a minor miscalculation, but the damage was done. Doubt had been planted in everyone's mind. That night, Jason came running to me. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "They're on to me. You have to help me." I pretended to think. "Maybe I can, if you give me more access. I want to see everything, emails, contracts, financial statements. If I can clean up your mess, you'll owe me." He hesitated for half a second before nodding. Just like that, the doors to Claire's empire opened wider. Every secret, every vulnerability was mine to exploit. Meanwhile, Ryan was busy digging his own grave. I knew temptation would get the best of him sooner or later. So I gave fate a little nudge. At a charity event, I introduced him to a stunning woman I'd hired for the night, a friend of a friend, gorgeous, flirtatious, and completely in on my plan. It didn't take long before Ryan was caught in compromising situations. A lingering hand here, a whispered comment there. And yes, I made sure there were cameras. The photos didn't need to go public yet. For now, it was enough to know I held them. Like strings tied around a puppet, waiting to be pulled. Mia, on the other hand, needed almost no effort. She loved feeling like she had exclusive information. All I had to do was feed her tiny bits of gossip, and she spread them like wildfire. I heard Claire's losing control of the board. She whispered at a brunch. "Did you know Ryan isn't as loyal as he pretends?" Every rumor traced back to me, though nobody suspected it. I began to see a change in Claire. Her confidence faltered. She snapped at her staff, barked orders that went ignored, and her once perfect image started to look desperate. Still, she refused to believe anyone could threaten her. That arrogance was the blindfold keeping her from noticing I was right there, circling her like a wolf. The turning point came during her annual gala, the one event she used to flaunt her wealth and status. She invited the city's elite, determined to prove that nothing was wrong. I made sure it became the night she'd never forget. I walked into the venue in a sleek black dress, unnoticed by most but deliberately noticeable to the right people. Jason saw me first. He stiffened, fear in his eyes, because he knew I could ruin him with one word. Ryan saw me next, and I caught the flicker of recognition, the kind that comes when someone remembers a dangerous secret. Mia, of course, ran straight to me, eager to gossip about how stressed Claire had been lately. It was almost too easy. The gala unfolded like a carefully staged play. Claire gave her speech, smiling brightly, her voice a little too tight. Guests clapped politely, though I caught the whispers behind their hands. Then, as dinner was served, I released the first blow. A board member received an anonymous email, financial documents highlighting Jason's embezzlement. I knew he'd confront Claire before the night was over. At the same time, another guest received a text with a blurred photo of Ryan looking far too cozy with another woman. By dessert, Mia was already telling people Claire might not be as in control as she seems. I didn't need to say a word. I just stood in the corner, sipping champagne, watching Claire's carefully built kingdom start to wobble. By the end of the night, Claire was visibly unraveling. She argued with Ryan in hushed tones by the staircase, her hands gesturing wildly. Jason tried to avoid the board members who glared at him. Mia pretended to console Claire while feeding the chaos with her whispers. And me? I slipped out before anyone noticed, leaving behind a ballroom buzzing with doubt, suspicion, and betrayal. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not just anger, but satisfaction. Claire had taken everything from me, but now I was taking it back in pieces. Still, I reminded myself not to rush. Revenge wasn't just about destroying her. It was about watching her lose everything she thought was untouchable. I wanted her to feel the walls close in slowly, suffocating her until she realized it was me, her sister, the one she had dismissed as weak, who had orchestrated it all. And the truth was, I wasn't even finished. The gala was just the opening act. The real performance was yet to come. The days following the gala were like watching a storm gather strength. It began with whispers. Board members questioning Jason's loyalty, friends questioning Ryan's faithfulness, and staff questioning whether Claire was still the invincible queen she pretended to be. Claire tried to keep her chin high, to silence the murmurs with her sharp tongue and expensive charm. But I could see it. The subtle twitch in her smile, the tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control. Jason was the first to crack. The board had called an emergency meeting, and though Claire tried to shield him, the documents I'd leaked spoke louder than her polished words. Numbers don't lie, and neither did the sudden $2.3 million gap in their accounts. Jason stammered, sweat dripping down his temple, and when cornered, he lashed out, blaming clerical errors and sabotage. His desperation only proved his guilt. Afterward, Claire stormed into her office and threw a glass against the wall. Ryan followed. But even through the door, I could hear her shrieking. Do you know how humiliated I was? They looked at me like I'm a fool. Ryan tried to calm her, his voice low. But I could imagine his expression, the smug detachment of a man who had never cared about her reputation as much as she did. And when the photos of him and my hired accomplice eventually surfaced in the right inboxes, Claire's rage at Jason would turn into paranoia about her husband. It was unfolding beautifully, but I wasn't content with just letting rumors gnaw at her edges. I wanted Claire to feel trapped in her own life. That's when I moved to stage 2, isolating her from her allies. Mia was my easiest weapon. I met her for coffee, leaning in as if sharing something too dangerous to say out loud. "Claire, she's been talking about you. She thinks you're careless. She said you can't be trusted with her secrets anymore." Mia's eyes widened with wounded betrayal. "She said that." "More than once," I whispered. "She's already looking for someone else to replace you. I thought you should know." It didn't take long before Mia began pulling back from Claire, no longer her loyal echo, but instead a quiet saboteur. The small circle Claire depended on began to shrink, leaving her surrounded only by people who wanted something from her. And even they were slipping away. Ryan, meanwhile, had no idea that the trap around him was tightening. He thought he could juggle his affairs quietly, but the woman I'd introduced him to wasn't just a fling, she was bait. She called him late at night, sent him photos, made him believe she was addicted to him. Every message, every slip, I collected. Evidence layered upon evidence until even Claire's iron will couldn't deny it. And Jason, poor, pathetic Jason, was already beyond saving. He begged Claire to trust him, but the more she defended him, the more foolish she looked in the eyes of her board. Investors began withdrawing support. A prestigious project slipped through her fingers. The empire she had so carefully paraded as untouchable was crumbling in public view. I watched her unravel with a kind of cold satisfaction. Each piece falling away was a reminder. This is what happens when you destroy me. Then came the dinner party. Claire, desperate to prove her strength, invited a small group of investors and friends to her home. She needed them to see her as composed, wealthy, unshaken. She wore a glittering emerald dress, her hair flawless, her smile painted on like armor. But underneath, she was brittle. I arrived late, slipping in quietly. Claire's eyes flickered when she saw me, as if a shadow had entered her carefully staged performance. I smiled sweetly, playing the role of the sister she had nearly forgotten. The evening began smoothly enough. Glasses clinked, laughter rose, and for a moment Claire seemed to believe she could still control the narrative. But halfway through dinner, one of the guests, an investor who had received my anonymous package earlier that day, asked a pointed question about Jason's financial oversight. The table went silent. Claire froze. Jason, already unsteady, tried to defend himself, but the investor pressed harder. Another joined in. Soon, the polished dinner turned into an interrogation. Claire's knuckles whitened as she clutched her wine glass, her smile breaking apart. And then, as if on cue, Ryan's phone buzzed. He excused himself, but not before his screen lit up, just long enough for me and others to catch a glimpse. A woman's name, a heart emoji, a message preview that read, "I miss you already." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Claire's eyes burned holes into him, her lips parting in fury, but she couldn't explode, not here, not in front of them. She swallowed it down, her emerald dress shimmering like a cage. I almost laughed. Everything was spiraling exactly as I had planned. By the end of the night, her guests left with polite goodbyes, but I could feel the shift in their eyes. Doubt, pity, the kind of look Claire hated most. She closed the door, turned to Ryan, and the argument erupted like fire. Jason tried to intervene, but only fueled her fury. Mia lingered in the corner, silent, watching her queen fall apart. And me? I stood there quietly, my glass of champagne still in hand, savoring the taste of victory. Because the cracks were no longer hidden. Claire's perfect world wasn't just trembling, it was breaking apart. And soon, she would know it wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was me. The fallout from the dinner party lingered in the air like a bitter aftertaste. Claire's house, once a stage for her lavish control, now felt like a cage. I knew because I stayed long enough to hear the thunder that erupted after the guests had gone. Ryan was shouting, his voice sharp and unapologetic. So what if I texted her? At least she listens to me. At least she doesn't treat me like I'm invisible. Claire's reply was venom. Invisible? You've been living off my name, my money, my reputation. Without me, you'd be nothing but a desperate lawyer with unpaid bills. Jason tried to interject, but his trembling voice was swallowed by the storm. He had no ground left to stand on. Even Claire's patience with him was thinning, though she still clung to him because abandoning him would mean admitting her own blindness. That night, for the first time in years, Claire didn't sleep in the same room as Ryan. Their empire wasn't just cracking, it was bleeding. And I was there to watch every drop spill. Over the next week, I continued my careful orchestration. I sent another anonymous tip to one of Claire's investors, this time exposing Ryan's questionable personal expenses. Lavish dinners, hotel stays, and consulting payments that conveniently matched the timeline of his affair. It was subtle, but enough to make them doubt not just Jason, but also Claire's judgment in choosing her husband as a public partner. Meanwhile, Mia, the once loyal shadow, was now playing her own game. She texted me late at night, frustration dripping from every word. She doesn't even notice me anymore. She only talks when she wants something. You were right, she doesn't value anyone. Then why stay? I replied gently, pretending to be the voice of reason. I don't know, Mia admitted, but I'm tired. Perfect. A tired ally is more dangerous than an enemy. But it wasn't enough for me to break Claire's reputation and circle of trust. I wanted her heart shattered too. And for that, I needed Ryan to fall deeper into the trap. The woman I had introduced to him, Sophie, was performing her role flawlessly. She fed his ego, told him he was brilliant, handsome, and misunderstood. She promised him freedom from Claire's shadow. And every word, every laugh, every kiss was carefully documented. Ryan, blinded by his arrogance, didn't see the net closing. Claire, however, began to sense something. I could see it in her eyes when we crossed paths. She was restless, pacing her office, her fingers drumming nervously on the desk. She snapped at her staff, dismissed Mia's questions, and even ignored Jason's desperate apologies. One afternoon, she cornered me in the hallway, her gaze sharp as a blade. "You've been different," she said. I tilted my head innocently. Different how? She narrowed her eyes, as if trying to pierce through me. "You smile too much, like you know something." I almost laughed at how close she was to the truth. "Maybe I'm just happy," I replied softly, letting her suspicion linger without confirmation. That doubt was enough. It planted a seed, and soon she'd be looking everywhere for enemies, even in the mirror. The breaking point came at a charity fundraiser a week later. Claire had insisted on attending, desperate to prove she was still untouchable. She wore diamonds that glittered like armor, her posture tall, her smile practiced. But beneath it all, her nerves showed in the way her hands trembled as she held her champagne flute. Ryan arrived separately, already unusual. But what shocked the crowd was when Sophie appeared minutes later, claiming to be there as an invited guest of one of the sponsors. The look on Ryan's face was priceless. Panic mixed with desire. I had arranged it perfectly. Throughout the evening, Sophie and Ryan exchanged glances, enough to be noticed. And when they slipped away to the balcony for what they thought was a private moment, several eyes followed, including Claire's. She found them there, her heels clicking against the marble as she approached. Ryan stepped back instantly, stammering, "Claire, it's not what it looks like." But it was too late. Sophie smirked, whispered something in Ryan's ear, and left him standing there alone under his wife's glare. The explosion didn't happen at the event. Claire still had enough control to keep her mask on. But once they returned home, the storm unleashed. "You humiliated me," she screamed, her voice echoing down the hall. "Do you know what they'll say? That I can't even keep my husband. That everything I built is a lie." Ryan, instead of apologizing, snapped back. "Maybe it is a lie. Maybe you're the problem, Claire. Maybe everyone leaves you because you choke them until they can't breathe." The words hit her harder than any betrayal could. I stood in the shadows, unseen, listening to the cracks splitting wider. This was what I had waited for. The moment Claire's fortress wasn't just trembling, but collapsing from the inside. And yet, it wasn't enough. Not yet. I wanted her to look at me when it all burned down. I wanted her to realize who had pulled every string, who had orchestrated her downfall with precision and patience. She wasn't there yet. But she would be. Because I wasn't done. Not even close. The night after the fundraiser was like an earthquake in Claire's mansion. Nothing was left standing. She locked herself in her study for hours, the sound of shattered glass echoing through the house as she hurled picture frames and vases against the walls. Jason kept pacing outside the door, whispering apologies that no one heard. Ryan vanished, probably with Sophie, and Mia stayed upstairs, silent and invisible as always. The household had become a battlefield, and I was the quiet general pulling strings from the shadows. But here was the thing about Claire. She was not someone who surrendered easily. She had built her empire by clawing her way over others, by turning enemies into stepping stones. And now that she felt cornered, she sharpened her claws again. She started damage control the very next morning. Cancel the photo shoot. Call the sponsors. Reschedule the board meeting, she barked at her assistant, her hair messy, her eyes bloodshot. She was unraveling, but she thought she could still hold the mask together with tape and lies. But I made sure the cracks widened. Every investor she reached out to hesitated. Every sponsor suddenly claimed scheduling conflicts. A charity she had donated to for years politely declined her help. One by one, her lifelines slipped from her grip. And in their place, whispers grew. Whispers that Claire had lost control, that her husband was unfaithful, that her judgment was poisoned by arrogance. Meanwhile, Ryan was slipping further into Sophie's arms. I had arranged another chance meeting, this time in a quiet corner of the city. He showed up in sunglasses and a baseball cap, thinking no one would notice. But of course, someone did. And of course, the photo made its way online. By the time Claire saw it, the image had already been shared across social media. The caption was cruel. The perfect couple? Not anymore. I knew what the picture meant. It wasn't just gossip, it was poison. Her brand had always been built on the illusion of perfection, on being untouchable. Now, with one photo, the illusion cracked. Claire's rage was volcanic. She confronted Ryan in the kitchen, slamming her phone down on the counter. "Do you see this? Do you see what you've done to me?" Ryan didn't even flinch. He poured himself a drink, smirking. "To you? Maybe it's about time people saw the truth. You're not perfect, Claire. You're just desperate. Her hand trembled as she pointed at him. You will not ruin me. I made you. I gave you everything. And I can take it back. But Ryan only laughed, that cruel, bitter laugh that told me Sophie had him wrapped around her finger. Jason tried to intervene again, pleading with Claire to calm down. But his words fell flat. To her, Jason was nothing but a constant reminder of her poor choices. She turned on him too. Don't speak to me, she snapped. You're no better. Weak, pathetic, clinging to scraps. At least Ryan had ambition once. You're a parasite. Jason's face crumbled, and for a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost, because he too had played a role in my suffering. He had stood by her side while I was cast aside. He had chosen her shadow over my friendship. Now he could drown in it. But the real victory came from Mia. For weeks, I had been watching her break, and now she finally cracked. Late one night, she called me, her voice shaking. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. She treats me like dirt. She screams. She ignores me. She replaces you. I finished for her gently. Mia's silence was the answer. She'll never see you, I continued. Not the way you want, not as someone important. To her, you'll always be just a servant. Mia sniffled. So what do I do? That was the moment I'd been waiting for. You help me, I said softly. And when this is over, you'll finally be free of her shadow. The pause was long, but then she whispered, okay. And with that, I had my final piece. Mia became my eyes and ears inside the house. She told me when Claire had meetings, when she was on calls, when she broke down in her room. She stole copies of documents Claire was trying to use to salvage her brand. She even forwarded me private emails. The mighty Claire was bleeding from within, betrayed not just by her husband, not just by her reputation, but by the very person she thought too weak to matter. But still, Claire fought. She held a press conference to deny the rumors, standing in front of flashing cameras with Ryan by her side. Her speech was polished, her tone controlled. Our family is strong. Our marriage is unshakable. Do not believe the lies. But as she spoke, Ryan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He smirked, glanced down, and I knew exactly whose message it was. Sophie's. Claire saw it too. Her voice cracked mid-sentence, and though she finished her speech, the image was already broken. Because no matter how strong her words were, the world saw the truth in her eyes. The truth that she was losing. And I was the one making sure she never stopped falling. But the final blow, oh, that was still coming. The one that would not just ruin her reputation, not just break her marriage, but rip apart her very identity. The blow that would make her look me in the eye and finally realize I was the storm she could never escape. The storm had reached its peak. Every lie Claire had built her empire on was cracking. Every person she had leaned on was slipping away. And yet, she still fought. That was the thing about Claire. She would rather burn with the ship than admit it was sinking. But I had saved the sharpest dagger for last. Mia had been feeding me information for weeks now, and what she uncovered was the gold I needed. Hidden deep in Claire's private files were contracts, falsified tax documents, and secret bank transfers that painted a very different picture of her so-called charitable empire. It wasn't about generosity. It was about power and money laundering. The world saw her as the shining face of compassion. Soon, they'd see the corruption beneath. I arranged for the evidence to leak at the exact moment when Claire was preparing her grand comeback. She had rented a ballroom in the city, invited reporters, sponsors, politicians, the whole glittering circle she once ruled. She wanted to prove she was still the queen, and I wanted her to choke on her own crown. The night of the gala, Claire descended the stairs in a silver gown, dazzling and defiant. Cameras flashed as she smiled, holding Ryan's arm as though nothing could touch her. But his eyes were cold, distant. He wasn't there for her. He was waiting for Sophie's next message. Jason stood in the corner, invisible as ever, nursing a drink. Mia trailed behind, carrying Claire's clutch like a servant. And I, though not physically present, was everywhere. My fingerprints were on every whispered rumor, every nervous glance, every crack in the foundation of her perfect world. Claire took the stage, her voice smooth and commanding. "My friends," she began, "tonight is not about the lies being spread. Tonight is about truth, about rebuilding, about family and strength and—" But then it happened. A notification buzzed across every reporter's phone at once. A shared file, a document dump, evidence, screenshots, scanned contracts, all neatly compiled and time-stamped. The room filled with murmurs, then gasps. One reporter stood up. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you explain these offshore accounts?" Claire froze. Her smile faltered. "Excuse me." Another voice cut in. "These documents show millions transferred from your charity funds. Were you stealing donations?" The murmurs turned into shouts. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing every second of her unraveling. Claire's face drained of color, her hands trembling on the microphone. This is fake. Lies," she stammered. But the room had already turned. Sponsors whispered to each other, investors stood and walked out, and Ryan quietly slipped away from her side. I could almost hear her heart shatter. Because this wasn't just gossip. This was proof. Tangible, undeniable proof that the woman who built her empire on benevolence was nothing more than a thief. The scene spiraled. Reporters swarmed her, firing questions. Jason finally tried to step in, but his words were drowned in the chaos. Mia, for the first time, didn't rush to help. She just stood there, watching her mother crumble, her lips trembling, but her eyes shining with something like relief. Claire screamed over the noise, her voice breaking. "I am not guilty. I gave everything. I built all of this with my own hands. I will not be destroyed." But the crowd no longer listened. They had the truth, and the truth didn't need her permission. By the end of the night, the ballroom was nearly empty. The reporters had left to publish their stories. The investors were gone. Ryan had disappeared into Sophie's arms. Jason sat slumped in a chair, broken and silent. And Claire, once the unshakable queen, was on her knees, mascara running, clutching the microphone like a lifeline no one wanted to throw her. It should have ended there. But I wasn't finished. Because she still didn't know who had done this. She still didn't know the face behind her fall. And I wanted her to see me. The next morning, I arranged it perfectly. Claire was in her study, papers scattered around her, headlines screaming from every screen. Charity Queen exposed as fraud. The knock on the door was soft. When she opened it, Mia stood there, pale, shaking, but with determination in her eyes. "There's someone here to see you," Mia whispered. And then I walked in. For a moment, Claire didn't recognize me. Or maybe she refused to. Her face twisted, cycling through shock, confusion, then fury. "You," she spat. "You dare come here?" I smiled. "Oh, Claire, I didn't just dare. I planned." Her fists clenched. "What did you do?" "Everything," I said simply. "Every whisper, every photo, every leak. It was me. The storm that took your empire apart? That was me. Her breathing grew ragged. Why? Why would you do this to me? I gave you nothing but scraps. I cut in sharply. Do you even remember the years I spent in your shadow? Do you remember how you humiliated me? How you dismissed me, replaced me, discarded me? You built your world on lies and arrogance, and you thought no one could touch you. But I touched you, Claire. I tore it all down. She shook her head, tears streaming now. You don't understand. I did it all for family, for survival. No, I said coldly. You did it for yourself. And now you've lost everything. Your husband, your reputation, your empire. Even your daughter sees the truth now. Claire's gaze flicked to Mia, who stood silently in the doorway. For the first time, Claire saw her, not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as someone who had betrayed her. Someone who had chosen me. Mia, Claire whispered, broken. But Mia didn't answer. She turned her face away, unable to look at her mother's destruction, but unwilling to help her either. That silence was the final knife. Claire collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The proud, untouchable queen was gone. All that remained was a broken woman drowning in the ruins of her own empire. And I felt it. The triumph, the justice, the satisfaction that had burned in my chest for years now pulsed like victory. I leaned closer, whispering in her ear, You gave everything to my sister. But I took your whole world apart. Her sobs echoed in the empty room as I turned and walked out, leaving her with nothing. The war was over, and I had won.